panel will have agreement on. First of all, I assume everyone agrees increased infrastructure spending for Amtrak. It would be helpful in Amtrak, and this next bill would be something good to do. So I think everyone's nodding yes. Does everyone agree, a little more thorny point, but I think everyone seems to agree on giving Amtrak a private right of action. Anyone disagree with that? All right, so we'll start. We have things that there's agreement on. So let me move on to some other issues. I want to ask Mr. Regan, Mr. Guy, and Mr. Dinsdale, how do cuts to Amtrak employees hurt, one, safety, and two, how does it hurt Amtrak service? If you could be quick, just give me a couple of examples on each. Let's start with Mr. Regan.
Well, I think if you look at the services being provided, I think it hurts ridership if you're cutting back on food and beverage employees, for instance, if you're cutting back on call center employees, if you're cutting back on the station agents, you're hurting the customer experience in that regard. And I think it's going to drive down ridership and in the long term not be healthy for the railroad.
You go, Mr. Dinsdale?
Yes, in regards to the safety issue, Amtrak employees are trained in emergency evacuation, first aid, and on the other side, as far as the service, it's important to understand how skilled these people are. Now, you saw this bag. Every train attendant that I know carries something in their bag that they've fashioned out of their own home because of things that go wrong on the train, whether it's air conditioning or toilets, something that they have that they can fix en route. Instead of telling a passenger, look, we have no one on here, we're going to have to wait till we get to Albuquerque or Denver. And so I think by replacing them with unskilled, unqualified people is both a safety issue and a service problem.
Thank you. Mr. Guy, do you?
I think when you talk about reducing a workforce, then you're leaving those that remain to do more. And when you're reducing a workforce that's in charge of inspections and fixing equipment and whatnot, it makes it harder to keep that up to a state of good repair, regardless if new equipment is coming. So we wouldn't want to see worker reductions to the point where safety is jeopardized. We don't think it is, but that's a path we wouldn't want to see.
And Mr. Guy, you had mentioned having a labor representative on the board of Amtrak. How do you think that would help change the current situation?
We consider ourselves sort of the face of Amtrak. The passengers interact with our members, on board trains most often. So we can hear concerns and complaints at times for those, and we can sprinkle that up to our leadership. And having that at a board level will better help Amtrak make decisions that could potentially impact negatively and positively the service.
Mr. Dinsdale, I think it was you who had in your testimony, correct me if I'm wrong, about some cuts that Amtrak had made, and you were saying if they had spoken to Amtrak employees, and Amtrak wound up turning those around, and if they had actually spoken to Amtrak employees where cuts occurred, that they probably would not have done that in the first place. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I didn't quite hear the whole question.
Was there a situation where Amtrak had made cuts to employees that they wound up going back on? I believe it was your testimony. I could be wrong on that, but Amtrak then wound up changing their mind and adding, eliminating those cuts.
Well, the only part I can think of in my written statement was the hiring of the outsourced people. Initially, the story was the call volume was down and they didn't need as many employees. Well, they in fact have as many employees at the outsourced company as they had before.
It was let me be a little more clear on this, the food and beverage, the cutting of the food and beverage service.
Yeah, in Florida, they had an issue where when they make these cuts, they come to us to try to avoid violating law by offering a early retirement, enhanced retirement package or a straight buyout. And a number of people applied in Florida to go to different cities, and they had to withdraw their offer to let them transfer because they needed them in Florida.
Thank you. I will, may come back for more questions. I have questions for Mr. Anderson about, again, about Chicago Union Station, and also some questions for the panel about cost transparency, but I will yield back, and I will recognize Mr. Smucker for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying I support the goal of ensuring we have passenger train service available, and we should continue to grow that. It's important in my area.